Well, Christmas is finally here. For some, Christmas can't arrive soon enough. I remember when I was a little kid, the anticipation of Christmas. When the tree went up and the ornaments were on it, and the lights, and all of that, when that was done and in place, I was ready. I was ready for Christmas. Now, it was probably a good 2 or 3 weeks before the actual celebration would happen, but I was excited for Christmas. Then it got to the point where I had responsibilities for Christmas. Things you had to put in, gifts you had to get, things you had to do. So, extending the season was desired. I'm not ready quite yet for Christmas sometimes. Anybody still have a gift you're hoping to get still before the stores close tonight? Good. Through this Advent season, the weeks ahead of Christmas, as we anticipate this night, as we anticipate the celebration of Jesus, we've been looking into the book of Isaiah and promises of hope, because Isaiah is really full of promise. Isaiah was a prophet about 700 years before Jesus, and he lived at a time when the kingdom of Judah, where he lived, in Jerusalem in the south, was divided from the northern tribes of Israel. There were 10 tribes in Israel, 2 in Judah. They were separated as 2 kingdoms. They had separate kings and leaders and everything, capitals, all of that. And Judah was in the south, and that's where Isaiah lived, and enemies around them, around these now 2 countries, were seeking to take advantage of their division. And so the 2, instead of joining forces, teaming up together, and supporting one another, instead they looked elsewhere, looked at joining forces with enemies of the other. And so Isaiah came along in Judah and was announcing prophecy that effectively the end was coming, that the enemies of God's people of Israel and Judah were going to win, that for their unfaithfulness, the people of God were going to lose what he had promised. They were going to lose the land where they were living. They were going to lose their nation, their sovereignty, their freedom. And yet in that, with all of that news that Isaiah was announcing, in that there's still hope. There's still promise. A couple of the promises that we've looked at. Isaiah chapter 9, words that we often look at Christmas time. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given. And we look at the fulfillment of that promise in Jesus, of course. Isaiah chapter 11 describes the wolf shall lie down with the lamb, the leopard with the goat, the calf and the lion together, and a little child shall lead them. And then tonight, Isaiah chapter 7. The virgin shall conceive and give birth to a son, and call his name Immanuel. Anticipating the season is a time of waiting and wondering. We wait, we wonder. Not what is coming at Christmas, for most of us know the story. Possibly all of us gathered tonight know the story of Jesus, the birth, and his life and death, and all that was to come, and fulfillment of these promises. But still, this is a season of waiting. We wait for promises to be fulfilled. Package delivery is something that we're just so familiar with now, right? A couple days ago, we went caroling as a family. We went to some houses just around our house in our little neighborhood block, maybe a little bit further out from that. Visited some folks, sang some Christmas songs and hymns. It was great. There was a house we went to in our neighborhood. We came up to the door, glass window in the door, and I could see through it as I approached the bell, and we're getting the pitch and we're ready to start so that we'd be singing as the door opened. This was the plan. And I look in and I can see that there's a football game on the screen of the TV. Okay. They're home. We can do this. Okay. This is ding dong. Joy to the world. Da, 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 da. And we sang like all the way through, almost the entire hymn. This is weird. I can see the football game. Maybe the volume of the TV drown out the doorbell. Knock, knock, knock. Step back. I don't know. Maybe we're on verse 3 or 4. I don't even remember. And finally, somebody comes toward the door. I'm like, okay, somebody's coming. Turns the corner, starts up the stairs. I could see this. I guess these people don't like Christmas. That's not true. He works at another church nearby in town. Finally, he gets part of the way up the stairs and must have heard us singing. Turned around, came down, opened the door. He's like, oh, heard the doorbell, thought it was probably Amazon. Didn't come to the door. We wait. We wonder. We wait for package delivery. We wait for personal promises to be fulfilled too, don't we? I'll take care of that. You ever heard those words? You ever said those words and then quickly forgot what it was that you were going to take care of? Or added something to your to-do list that was already really long. So the new thing is at the bottom, and as far as you're concerned, you're going to start checking them off from the top. Or maybe it's somebody else that did that. And so we wait, and we wait for the promise to be kept. And sometimes it takes a while. Judah was possibly wondering, what is God going to do when Isaiah comes along and starts talking about things like, oh, the vineyard's going to be trampled. That's chapter 5. Assyria is coming. The enemies are coming. Israel is going to go away. And in fact, that's earlier in this chapter, before we get to these promises. The enemies were closing in, and the enemies of Judah were not far behind. For us, maybe we're wondering what God is going to do as well. We're waiting on God to fulfill some promise. Maybe we're waiting for some kind of good news. We're waiting for a healing. We're waiting for a reconciliation. We're waiting for some intervention that God might offer, and we're waiting for that. We look at the world around us. We read the news, and there's conflicts. There's decay in society, or so it seems, and the hardships that we faced over the last couple of years don't seem to be going away. Not just the illness, but as much as that has affected us physically, I'm of the belief that it's affected us mentally, emotionally, psychologically, equally as much. And so perhaps we're waiting for God to intervene and to do something, and we watch for signs. We watch for signs of fulfillment. There are people across the country watching for signs of fulfillment, pulling out the phone and looking at the app that tracks the flights and hoping their loved one can get on the flight. Earlier today, I heard a story about a family that we know very well. They live in Minnesota. They decided to go to Florida for Christmas for the first time. Well, my good friend Brian, from years and years ago, not much of a flyer, and I guess they wanted a vehicle while they were in Florida, so he threw a bunch of stuff in the van or something and started driving a couple of days ago. He's in Florida. His family that was going to fly down to meet him is not in Florida. And Gina found out just before this service started that the first flight that they can get is Monday. Man. Hoping, waiting for that kind of fulfillment. Waiting for the phone to buzz with the text that says, I've arrived. Waiting for the credit that you were promised by a customer service representative to show up on your invoice. We wait for things. Isaiah offered Ahaz, the king of Judah, the opportunity to ask for a sign. Ask the Lord for a sign. It can be as high as heaven. as deep as Sheol? Ask. What kind of sign do you need? That God is faithful. That God's going to keep his promise. That God is with us as his people. What kind of sign do you need to see in order to believe that and not to look elsewhere, to other countries, to our enemies, to become allies? What kind of sign do you need? What kind of sign do you want? Ahaz's response, and it sounds so pious. I'm not going to bother God with that kind of request. No, I won't even ask. It sounds so like faithful, like I don't need a sign. That's not really what Ahaz was doing. Because Ahaz was already looking elsewhere, already looking at the other nations around. Who can join with me to defeat them? Was his hope, was his question. Where do we look for help? Where do we look for hope? When we're feeling all these things, waiting and anticipating what might happen, what could happen, a lot of times we find ourselves feeling alone. Judah was probably feeling isolated. Mary and Joseph. As we think about Christmas, we can't help but think about the birth. And the things that Luke chapter 2 describes. They went to Bethlehem. Joseph's ancestral town, but a lot of reason to believe they may have had distant family there, but I mean, they're looking for a place to stay. They didn't even have some like remote cousin that could say, oh, sure, yeah, come on in. And there they were in some back alley kind of place. It certainly reads like. And she goes into labor. Oh, awful. Earlier this week, I read a news report that there's a tomb where it's believed the midwife at the birth of Jesus was buried. So despite the lyric, there were no midwives to be found. There's at least a tradition that there was a midwife there, and a tomb where she had been buried was then a place where pilgrims would go and visit for a long time. According to this excavation that's happened, and there's this like really nice courtyard outside this tomb, and a place in the corner where there were some like lamps that they discovered, like several, more than a household would need, more than a tomb would have. So it's believed that pilgrims would come and then get a lamp, rent one from the little shop that was there, the kiosk at the tomb, and take it into the tomb and light the lamp and say prayers or whatever they did. It's going to be open to the public fairly soon, from what I read. So maybe Mary did have some help, but still they certainly seem alone. We can be pretty certain that she literally had, as the other lyric said, no mother's hand to hold. Maybe you felt alone. Maybe that feeling is like no one understands. No one understands what I'm facing. No one understands what I'm going through. No one understands what I've suffered. Maybe you felt lonely even in a crowd. Maybe over the last couple of years, the isolation that we've all had to deal with in some level has really affected you. And that's continuing. Now the reports are of a resurgence. And if you look at the curve that we flattened in 2 weeks or 3 weeks or whatever it was, big little hit thing, and we're there. It's not the, summer before last, I guess it was the big one. I don't know, I can't keep track anymore. Can you not keep track anymore? It's hard. And this isolation that we've dealt with has affected us, so we sometimes want to run and hide. Read another story about a pastor who was visiting a children's home run by the denomination of the church that he served, and he went there where children were living, kind of group setting, and there was a Christmas tree, and they were going to have a Christmas dinner, and there were gifts for all the kids, and it looked like a real exciting time. There's one boy who they didn't find him. He was in the house, and they knew that, They didn't know where he was, and they looked around and they checked the bedroom where he stayed, and he was there under the bed. And they tried to bring him out, and they told him all about the tree. It's a beautiful tree. You've seen the tree. It's all lit up. It's so beautiful. You got to come out. And tonight there's gifts. The gifts under the tree. We're going to open the gift. There's a gift for you. Come out. Oh, the dinner. We're going to have, the turkey and stuffing and mashed potatoes and green beans, like the whole Christmas dinner, the spread. It's going to be the best dinner we've had in a long time, at least since Thanksgiving. Come on out. And he refused. He was under the bed and he just wouldn't come out. The story describes that the pastor got down, laid down next to the bed, and talked to the boy. Still, he wouldn't come out. So the pastor sucked it in, squeezed under the bed, and slid in next to that boy. Tonight, in our fears, in our isolations, in our separations, in our burdens, in our grief, in our worry, in all the things that make us feel separated, alone, isolated, or afraid, we can know this. The God of the universe has come to where we are. That God is with us. And that's what Christmas is all about. That God is with us. That in all that we face, he is our Immanuel. And he meets us where we are. Philippians chapter 2 describes how he humbled himself, took on the form of a servant, became obedient to death, even death on a cross, for you and for me. A group of us this past summer had the privilege of traveling to Bethlehem, part of a tour that went and saw all parts of Israel. It's not hard, it's not very big. As we traveled, we went from place to place, and the vast majority of the places that we went had some very biblical significance. This is a place where Paul was. This is where Jesus lived. This is where he healed Peter's mother-in-law, et cetera, et cetera. We got to Bethlehem. And in Bethlehem, there's a church. You go in the church, and under the altar, so the altar is elevated from where the people are, and then under that, there's a cave. So you go under the altar, and you go down some steps, and you get down to this cave, and there's a star on the floor. It's believed that right there is where Jesus was first laid, where the manger was. In a little niche, a little place carved out to feed animals. And then across from that, there's another small place, and there's kind of an altar down there, and it's believed, where Mary was, where Jesus was born. And it was amazing to go in that cave and to see that. But what kind of hung over that whole experience was that in that church was a lot of gold, and everything was like covered with decor, and there were all these hanging lamps and lantern things and incense burning things. And it was run by the Orthodox, and they had all these decorations in there and icons, and just it was too much for me. It was personal preference more than anything. It wasn't wrong theologically. There's no problem with decorating. We've done it. But it just felt like too much. The same cave complex, there's another building, and the buildings are attached. So we went kind of out a door and in a door immediately into another church, and it's run by, I think, Roman Catholics. Very simple interior to that church, and another set of steps that went down into another cave. The caves are connected. So when we got down there was the cave, and then there was a little like kind of pathway inside this cave, and then it was blocked off. There was a door. It was closed. Our guide told us on the other side of that door is where you were before. Oh. The side of the cave that we were in at that point was much simpler. And it was easier for me, and I think several other people in our group, to imagine this is what it really looked like. This is what it really felt like. There was no gold star on the floor and an altar above it with all these candles. There was no tapestry on the wall. It was a very simple place. But God, the God of the universe, came there and was born. The incarnation of Jesus. I mean, just mind-blowing that the God of the universe, all-powerful, omni-everything God, could be born. A humble, innocent, vulnerable, tiny child. When you've held a child, you know how small, how vulnerable, especially a newborn, how it just seems like their life is just hanging on, kind of. You have to do everything. You have to feed them. You have to change them. You have to take care of them. You have to make sure they get all the things that they need. That's who Jesus was in order to feed us, to take care of us, and to make sure we could get everything that we need. Our Immanuel, the one who was promised, came to us, came with the promise, the child of promise, that the virgin would give birth to a son and call him Immanuel. He is our Immanuel, and he is with us. And he's with us to stay. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. The Message translation says, moved into the neighborhood. And he is with us always to the very end of the age. That's the promise at the end of the book of Matthew. He's with you, with me, always. He is our Immanuel. Amen.